The stamp came down hard, and the divorce decree slid across the counter into my palm like a hot coin. My jaw stayed locked, the same way it had been for almost 3 years. Tamsin Vale stood at the clerk window signing her last line like she was returning a sweater, not ending a marriage. My name was Wells Harrow. I was 35. My driver's license still said Round Rock, Texas, but I'd been living in a condo in Austin for years, and that morning I was stuck in the Travis County Records Annex, smelling old paper and lemon cleaner. Behind Tamsin, her mom Darlene hovered with that tight, I won smile, the one she wore every time my money fixed their mess. She didn't even let the ink dry before she snapped, "All done, don't linger, get your stuff and go." Tamsin did what she always did, eyes down, quiet. Like if she stayed soft enough, the room wouldn't explode. Quick note, before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. Brioni, her younger sister, leaned on the counter like we were checking in for a flight. "We can still make our 3:30 appointment," she chirped. "Escrow closes today, and they already picked a couch that looks expensive on camera." Darlene patted her oversized designer bag and said, "I brought all 8 platinum cards." She said it like she was holding the only keys that mattered. Those 8 cards were authorized users under my main account, issued back when I thought being helpful would buy peace. I looked down at the decree again. Dissolution of marriage. Something in my chest went cold and clean. There was no reason left to keep financing their little empire, and my thumb was already on my phone. I opened the card dashboard and tapped Darlene's name. Cancel. The screen confirmed it. Cancel again. Then again. I didn't look up. I didn't ask. I kept moving because pausing was how I got drained. My phone buzzed in my hand, small and steady. Tamsin finally lifted her head and her voice barely reached me. "Wells, what are you doing?" She said it like I was the one making a scene, like the last few years never happened. I didn't answer. 4th card, 5th, 6th. Darlene kept talking anyway, loud and breezy, about down payment and furnishing, like my limits were a family tradition. When I hit the 7th cancellation, Darlene's smile twitched. She dug through her bag and slapped a card on the counter, then another, like the plastic itself could argue with the system. I tapped the last one. Cancel. Then I finally looked up. I didn't raise my voice. "Those aren't your cards," I said. "They never were." Tamsin's mouth opened like she wanted to say later, like later would fix it all. Darlene stared at me, stunned and angry. I folded the decree, slid it into my jacket, and walked out of that annex without stopping. The sunlight hit me as soon as the doors shut behind me, and I kept walking like the building might reach out and grab my sleeve. The decree was folded once in my jacket pocket, stiff against my ribs, and the air filled my lungs so sharp it felt like I'd been underwater and just surfaced. I didn't turn around to hear anyone chase me down. I stepped to the curb, opened the rideshare app, and ordered the first car close enough to end this conversation. My phone chimed with the pickup, and I watched the street until a gray Camry rolled up and the back door unlocked. I slid into the back seat and shut the door, keeping my shoulders squared. The driver was Earl Goodwin, mid-50s, salt and pepper beard, plain work shirt, the kind of guy who didn't ask questions for sport. He glanced at the annex in his mirror and said, "That place makes people smaller." Then he merged into traffic like we were leaving a wake. My phone started vibrating before we cleared the parking lot, and it kept trying to climb out of my hand. First Tamsin, then Darlene, then Brioni, then numbers I didn't recognize, and none of it was love calling me. Texts piled up. "Please unlock them. We're already on the way. Stop being like this." And from Tamsin, "Can we not do this right now? Let's talk later." I didn't type a speech because speeches were how I used to bargain for basic respect, and I was done bargaining. I sent Tamsin one line, "There is no later." Then I muted her thread so the screen could stop screaming at me. I left her unblocked because I wanted the receipts to keep stacking on their own. Earl heard the buzzing and kept his eyes on the road. He said, "When folks panic that hard, it's usually about money." And I nodded because that was my whole marriage in one sentence. The city slid by in bright strips of sun and shadow while I finally breathed like I wasn't bracing for a lecture. In the back seat, I made the second move that mattered and called the bank's fraud and controls line. I told the rep I was the primary cardholder. The divorce finalized that day, and all authorized users tied to Darlene Vale had to stay terminated with no exceptions. After a quick verification, she gave me a case number and I saved it in my notes. Before I hung up, I opened the joint household account and locked it down, cutting off new transfers and blocking new external payees. A voicemail from Darlene hit my screen, and even on preview I heard her calling me ungrateful and saying I owed her family. Right after, Tamsin texted, "Bryony's going to lose the unit. Mom is crying. Just turn one back on and we'll figure the rest out." Like she was asking for a favor instead of demanding access. I didn't argue with any of it. I saved the messages, took screenshots until I had the whole thread, and forwarded everything to my personal email so it couldn't disappear. Then I added the bank case number to the subject line and hit send. The email thread finished flying out of my phone, and I barely had time to breathe before another notification slid across the screen. The sender name was Keaton Red, and the subject line landed hard. Payment attempt declined. Buyer verification needed. I hadn't been in any condo sales gallery, but I didn't need to be there to know exactly what kind of mess they were making. Keaton had my address because months earlier Tamsin had put me down as the payer contact, back when everybody treated my wallet like it was part of the deal. His email was clean and professional, the kind of writing that tries hard not to sound amused. It listed a timestamp, a unit number, and one blunt note. System rejected all card-present and manual entry attempts. Unit hold expires at 4:45 p.m. I stared at that last line while the car hummed over the road, and I could almost hear Darlene's heels clicking on some showroom tile. Keaton's tone stayed neutral, which told me he'd seen problems before, just not usually this dumb and this loud. I didn't reply yet because my phone rang before I could even tap the keyboard. It was a number I didn't have saved, and I knew it was her as soon as I answered. Tamsin's voice came out tight, like she was holding tears back in public. "We're here, Wells, and the cards won't go through, so please don't do this here," she said, like the location changed what was right. I kept my voice even because even was all she deserved in that moment. "Why is this my problem?" I asked, and she went quiet long enough for the background noise to bleed through. I heard soft music, polite voices, and that corporate calm that makes a family meltdown look even uglier. She tried again with her old tool, the one that always bought her time. "Please not here, Wells, because people are watching," she said. Like embarrassment mattered more than what she'd let them do. I kept my voice low, and I didn't bargain. "You've been renting later with my money," I told her. And I ended the call before she could slide into another excuse. A second email came in from Keaton almost right after, and it read like he was documenting a car accident. He said Darlene demanded to file the decline as fraud and claimed the cards were stolen, and he added a polite correction that authorized user status didn't work like that. He wrote that the primary cardholder's controls override, which was his way of saying she could yell all she wanted and it still wouldn't change the system. Then I got a photo text from Bryony that she probably didn't mean to send me, because it looked cropped and shaky. It showed a counter with scattered cards, and Darlene's hand was slammed flat on marble like she was trying to pin the building down. The caption was 2 words that made my teeth clench. "Fix this." A minute later, Tamsin messaged again, softer, trying to wrap pressure and concern. "Mom says you're going to ruin her health, and she can't take this," she wrote, like boundaries were a form of assault. I didn't answer her because that line was their favorite move, and I wasn't playing the guilt game anymore. Keaton's next message was the one that mattered, because it wasn't emotion or noise. "If you are not authorizing any purchase, we'll need written confirmation so we can document file integrity," he wrote, basically asking me to put it in black and white so nobody could pretend later. I typed back, "I do not authorize. Please document," attached a scan of the decree, and hit send. The second I sent that email, the noise didn't stop. It just changed channels. I put my phone down like it was a hot pan, but it kept lighting up anyway, buzzing on the table and rattling against the wood. I wasn't in the condo building lobby when they came back from the failed showroom run, but I still got the whole performance in pieces. Like people couldn't wait to hand me the playbill. My mom, Marjorie, called first, and she didn't waste time clearing her throat. "I just heard Darlene in your lobby," she said, calm in the way she got when she was disgusted. She was snapping at the concierge and demanding to know who told people anything, and she kept saying you stole her accounts like she was the victim of a robbery. I could hear lobby echo behind my mom's voice, and it told me she'd been close enough to catch the whole thing. Before I could respond, my building chat started popping off, and that was when Lorena Spivey turned it into a public show. Lorena was the admin who lived for community updates, like she was running a neighborhood news desk with a ring light. She posted, FYI, the Vales had a rough day at the developer office. And then she added a grimacing face and those little eyes people used when they wanted to pretend it was concern instead of entertainment. Screenshots followed like breaking news. People chimed in fast, because nothing brought strangers together like a rich person meltdown that suddenly looked less rich. Someone wrote, "Isn't Wells the one who's been paying for all that?" And another replied, "8 cards is wild, that is not normal." It wasn't even gossip anymore. It was the building doing math out loud with the confidence of people who finally had proof. Then Gideon Pruitt, the older guy on the 3rd floor who always sounded like he was taking roll in a courtroom, posted one sentence that landed heavy. Honest question, what exactly did she ever contribute? The chat went quiet for a second, like everybody had to swallow before agreeing without typing it. Mavis Klein jumped in next, and she didn't sugarcoat a thing. "If that was my son, I would tell him to cut it off sooner," she wrote. That one hit me harder than I wanted, because it confirmed what I'd tried to ignore for years. Everybody saw the setup, and I was the last one still acting like calling it family made it normal. Later that evening, I went back to the building to grab the rest of my clothes and paperwork, and the lobby felt colder than normal even though the air was the same. People weren't staring at me like it was a movie scene. They were doing that quick look-away thing the second our eyes met, like they didn't want to be caught watching the crash. I kept my stride steady and my face blank, because I wasn't giving anybody a trembling chin to talk about. I hit the elevator bank and ran straight into Darlene. She stood there with her phone in her hand like it was a weapon, shoulders squared like she was ready to swing. She said it loud enough for at least 2 people to hear. "You're proud of humiliating women?" That was her angle every time. Manners instead of money. As if I'd canceled etiquette instead of cards. I didn't bite, and I didn't explain, because explanations were how she got her hooks in. "I'm proud of being done," I said, and I stepped into the elevator without another word. My hands didn't shake, but my stomach rolled, and I kept my eyes on the closing doors until her face disappeared. On my floor, Lorena was half hidden near her door like she was just getting packages, and she watched me carry boxes like I was a new episode. I gave her one nod, and she nodded back, like we both understood something had ended and the building was going to talk about it either way. I walked into my old unit, and Tamsin was sitting on the edge of the couch with her phone in her lap, looking like she was waiting for me to rescue her from her own life. She said, "Can we please not do this tonight?" And I told her tonight is exactly when it gets done, as I set the first box down and opened the closet. The next morning, I sat at my mom Marjorie's kitchen table because she was the only person I knew who could turn chaos into columns without making it a therapy session. Her house smelled like coffee and dish soap, and the table was already cleared like she'd been waiting for me to stop pretending this was going to fix itself. Mom was retired audit, and she treated numbers like truth serum, the kind that burned going down but didn't lie afterward. I came in with a thick stack of printed statements, card summaries, and the bank case number written on the top page in black ink. I didn't bring a sob story because my mom never needed tears to understand damage. She put on her reading glasses, started scanning line items, and her lips pressed together in that tight way she got when she was choosing not to say what she'd been thinking for years. She didn't look up at first, just tapped the paper with her pen like it was a pulse point. After a few minutes, she asked, "How long has Darlene had those cards under your account?" Her voice stayed even, but the question landed hard because it forced me to say it out loud. I swallowed and answered, "Since the fall 2 years ago." And hearing myself say it made me feel stupid in a clean, undeniable way. Mom didn't insult me or sigh for effect. She just wrote it down and kept moving like facts were the only thing that mattered. We totaled what ran through those authorized cards, and the list read like a life I never agreed to sponsor. There were designer stores, luxury spa packages, weekend hotel stays, and constant little charges that didn't match any normal routine. Mom paused when she hit the cash-like transactions at a cash advance terminal. Not huge one by one, but steady enough to feel like a habit instead of an emergency. She circled that pattern and said, "This is the kind of thing people do when they want money without a receipt." And then she kept adding without waiting for my reaction. By lunchtime, she had a clean total on a single sheet, and she slid it to me like a bill I'd been dodging. The number sat there in her neat handwriting. $1,146,380 in charges tied to Darlene and Bryony over the span we tracked, not counting my normal household spending. My throat tightened, but I didn't argue with paper, because paper didn't care how embarrassed I was. Mom just held my gaze and said, "Now you understand why they panicked so fast." Then she opened Keaton's escrow email attachment and leaned closer, her fingertip landing on the buyer information. "Why is Darlene listed as the intended occupant on this condo paperwork?" she asked, and my stomach dropped so hard it felt like I missed a step. The condo hadn't been for Bryony, not really, and Bryony suddenly looked like a cover story with good lighting. I pulled up old texts on my phone and scrolled until I found the thread I'd ignored months ago because I didn't want another fight. Darlene had written something like, "Bryony can stage it while I get settled," and at the time I'd let it slide like it was just her running her mouth. Now it read like a confession that had been sitting in my pocket the whole time. Mom didn't gloat, she just said, "So the plan was simple. You pay, they take, and you keep smiling." And she said it like a diagnosis, not an insult. We built a ledger that afternoon, plain and brutal, with dates, merchant names, amounts, who used what, and the matching bank record for every single claim. Mom insisted every entry needed a source, and she made me label statement page numbers, attach screenshots, and save email headers like we were building a file for someone who hated us. Before I left, she told me, "Stop doing phone calls unless you're recording and it's legal where you are, and move everything to email because people lie less when they know it's saved." Then she printed 2 copies of the ledger, handed me one, and watched me slide it into my folder before I stood up and zipped my bag shut. I walked out of my mom's house with the ledger in my bag and her "boundaries with evidence" line still ringing in my ears. The air outside felt dry and bright, and I kept my face set because the second I softened, I knew I'd start making excuses again. I drove home and put the folder in a drawer like it was something sharp. Then I went back to living on purpose instead of waiting to be cornered. 2 days later, the bank called me directly, and the rep's voice had that careful tone people use when they're reading policy off a screen. She said, "Mr. Harrow, we received a report that the cards were compromised, and the claimant says you are blocking funds out of spite." I didn't gasp or argue, because drama was what Darlene fed on, and I wasn't handing her a meal. I answered with one sentence that didn't leave room for interpretation. She was an authorized user, and authorization ended. The rep paused, then asked for documentation, and I told her I'd send it while we were still on the line. I opened my email and attached the authorized user forms and the divorce decree. Then I typed a short message that sounded like it came from a robot with a spine. I didn't add insults or history, because history was where people hid. A few hours later, the bank confirmed in writing that the cancellation stood, and they noted Darlene's fraud claim was being closed as non-credible. And that email became my favorite kind of quiet. Later that afternoon, another message hit my inbox with the word "urgent" sitting at the top like a warning label. It was Keaton Red, and he said escrow had received an electronic signature packet from me, authorizing alternate payment and acknowledging occupancy terms, and he needed me to confirm I signed it. I opened the packet and my pulse didn't spike so much as tighten, because I saw my name typed wrong by 1 letter, and the IP location didn't match anything I'd ever used. That wasn't confusion, and it wasn't a system hiccup. That was someone trying to shove a deal through the back door and hoping I'd be too tired to notice. I called Keaton and kept my tone as steady as a voicemail menu. "I did not sign that, I do not authorize anything, and I need the file flagged for suspected forgery," I said, making sure every word sounded like it belonged in a report. Keaton didn't gasp or preach, which told me he'd dealt with messy people before. He said, "Understood, I will freeze movement and document chain of custody." And then he asked me to email a written statement so his file stayed clean. I told him I was sending it immediately because I wanted every step time-stamped. 5 minutes later, Tamsin called like she could smell the lock clicking into place. Her voice came fast and thin like she was trying to outrun the facts. "We didn't do anything, okay? It's probably a system mistake," she said, and I could hear her trying to make it sound casual. "A system mistake doesn't misspell my name," I replied, and I let the silence sit there until she had to deal with it. She shifted into the soft approach like she always did when the first tactic failed. "Can we talk tomorrow and fix it like adults?" she asked, like forgery was a scheduling issue. "You don't fix forgery with a conversation," I said, and I ended the call before she could rent more time. Right after I sent her an email recapping the facts and attaching Keaton's note, so she couldn't pretend later that nothing happened. I kept it short, clean, and cold, because cold was the only temperature that stopped games. That night, somebody knocked hard on my door, and when I looked through the peephole, I saw Darlene standing there with Bryony behind her like backup. Darlene lifted her chin like the hallway was her stage and said, "You're going to ruin our future because you're bitter, and you know you can fix this." Bryony started crying on cue, wiping at her face like she was auditioning, and Darlene snapped, "Real men provide for family, even when they are mad." I didn't step into the hallway argument because the hallway was where they performed, and I wasn't the audience anymore. I stayed behind my threshold and said, "If you contact me again in person, I will treat it as harassment and document it." Darlene opened her mouth for another speech, and I closed the door gently and turned the deadbolt. The deadbolt clicked, and the sound felt cleaner than any insult Darlene threw at me. I stood there with my hand still on the knob, listening to their footsteps fade down the hall, and then I turned back into my place like I owned my air again. I didn't pour a drink or pace around because that was old behavior, and old behavior was how they stayed comfortable. Once the escrow forgery attempt was documented, I stopped reacting to noise and started hunting for what else they'd been hiding. I pulled the last 18 months of our joint account statements and spread them across my kitchen table until it looked like a claim file. The overhead light made the paper glare and my eyes burned, but I kept going because sleep didn't fix lies. I opened my laptop, lined up the PDFs, and started marking anything that didn't belong. That's when I noticed the transfers, repeating like a drip you don't hear until the room's quiet. The payee name was S. Knox Studio, and the memos tried to make it sound harmless with words like supplies and consult. That wasn't a household vendor, and it sure wasn't a bill I'd ever agreed to. The amounts were small enough to slide under the radar, but steady enough to build a pattern. I cross-checked the dates against my work travel calendar, and my throat went tight when the timing lined up. A lot of those transfers landed on days I'd been out of town closing commercial renewals and trusting that home was handled. I didn't need a detective to connect it. I just needed to stop being naive. I added them up twice because I wanted zero mistakes, and the total came out to $97,450 spread across dozens of payments. I called Tamsin and kept my voice steady, because steady was stronger than yelling. "Who is Sable Knox?" I asked, and she answered too fast, like she'd been waiting for that question. "She is just a friend, and you're making this into something," she said, trying to stay above the numbers like they were beneath her. I didn't let her float. "Why did my money go to her?" I asked, and I heard her inhale like she wanted to reset the whole conversation. "You're looking at numbers without context, and you need to stop doing this when you're worked up," she said. Then she tried to slide back into her favorite stall. "Can we talk when you've cooled off and do it the right way?" "This is me calm," I told her. And then I read 2 transfer dates out loud, slow enough that she couldn't pretend she didn't recognize them. "On October 7th, you sent money to S. Knox Studio, and on January 15th, you sent more." She didn't deny it, and she didn't explain it. She just went soft and slippery. "It wasn't like that, Wells, and you're twisting it," she said, which was the same useless sentence she always used when she didn't have truth to stand on. I ended the call and moved it to writing the way my mom taught me, because writing didn't forget. I drafted a formal accounting request with the transfer list attached and asked her to confirm, in writing, whether any of those payments were for marital expenses. I gave her a deadline of 5 business days, not because I enjoyed being strict, but because deadlines stopped games. Before I sent it, I drove the draft over to my mom's place, and she read it like she was reviewing a report for court. She tapped the page with her pen and said, "No adjectives, no anger, just facts and what you want." She didn't say it sweet, and she didn't say it cruel. She said it like she was saving me from myself. I deleted every emotional line, stripped it down to the ledger and the ask, and hit send as soon as I got back to my car. That evening, Lorena posted in the building chat, "Anyone else see a glam girl on the 3rd floor asking for Wells?" She didn't name the girl, but I already knew the name on the statement, and my stomach tightened with that cold, exact kind of certainty. Tamsin's friend wasn't a rumor anymore. She was walking in my building like she belonged there, and that only happened when people thought I wouldn't push back. I screenshot Lorena's message and sent her a private reply asking her to tell me the second the glam girl showed up again. The next day, I cut out of work early and drove home with my shoulders tight because I didn't like strangers orbiting my life. I walked into the lobby and headed for the mailboxes, telling myself I was just checking my mail, but my eyes were already scanning for movement. The air smelled like polished stone and somebody's cologne, and the whole place felt like it was waiting to see what I'd do. Sable Knox stood by the mailboxes like she belonged there. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, phone in hand, looking up at faces as they passed. When she spotted me, she smiled like we were meeting for coffee instead of this. "Wells, right?" she said, and her voice carried that fake friendly tone people use when they think charm is a key. "Tamsin said you'd be reasonable." That was the first red flag because she talked like my bank account was my personality. I kept my voice level and didn't step closer than I had to. "What do you want?" I asked, and I let the question hang there like a closed door. She didn't even pretend it was about feelings or misunderstandings. She tilted her head and started listing needs like she was reading a bill. "My rent is due, my business has overhead, and those transfers can't just stop," she said like I was the one who'd made promises. She watched my face like she expected me to soften, and all I felt was that hard click of realizing she'd been coached. I pulled my phone out and started recording openly, holding it at my chest so there was no confusion. "Say it again," I told her, keeping my voice flat and clear. "Tell me you came here for money." She hesitated for half a second, then her expression tightened like she was annoyed I wasn't playing along. "Yes, I came here for money because Tamsin said you always pay," she said, and the sentence came out sharp like she was tired of pretending. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Lorena near the elevator, leaning against the wall and scrolling like she was invisible. She wasn't invisible, and I didn't mind that she wasn't, because witnesses made people careful. I kept the phone steady and looked back at Sable. "Did Tamsin tell you we were still married when those transfers started?" I asked, and I didn't dress it up as curiosity. Sable blinked like she hadn't expected that question, and her smile slipped. "She said it was basically over," she answered. Then she added the part that made my throat go tight. "She said you don't check." That line landed harder than any insult Darlene ever threw at me. Not because it was clever, but because it was accurate in the ugliest way. I didn't argue with her about my past habits because the recording didn't need my shame. She tried to pivot, and I could hear the shift into threat-light territory, the kind that stayed just legal enough to deny later. "If you don't keep things smooth, people talk," she said, voice dropping like she was doing me a favor. "Brands don't like messy, and you don't want that." She wasn't saying blackmail, but she was trying to lean on reputation like it was a leash. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't get dramatic because finished was stronger than loud. "You're on camera now," I told her, making sure the words were clean and usable. "If you contact me again, you'll hear from my attorney." Her eyes flicked to the phone, and I watched her confidence drain like somebody pulled a plug. She muttered, "Whatever, this is ridiculous," then stepped back like she was suddenly late to somewhere else and walked toward the doors. A few seconds after she left, my phone buzzed with a private message from Lorena. "I have building camera angles if you need them," she wrote, like she'd been waiting to offer. I didn't like needing any of it, but I wasn't too proud to protect myself, so I typed back, thanked her, and saved the recording to my cloud folder. I left the lobby with my phone still warm from recording, and I stopped treating any of this like a breakup. With the escrow forgery flagged and Sable on record admitting the money pattern, it turned into cleanup, plain and simple. I went upstairs, opened my laptop, and started closing doors before they could kick them in. I opened a new bank account in my name only and moved my income stream over, because I wasn't letting another penny land where someone else could touch it. I changed my direct deposit the same day. Then I canceled anything shared that still had my name on it, from streaming subscriptions to utilities that had quietly stayed tied to me. It wasn't spite and it wasn't drama. It was stopping leaks. Every confirmation email felt like a latch sliding into place. Tamsin emailed me for the first time instead of calling, and that alone told me she finally understood I wasn't picking up later anymore. Her message was short and careful, like she was trying to sound grown up for once. "Can we meet quietly and settle this like adults?" she wrote, and I could almost hear her practicing the line. I replied with conditions and nothing else. Public place, daytime, 1 hour, no Darlene, no Bryony. I attached the spending ledger and the transfer list again, because I wasn't letting her pretend she didn't know what this was about. A little while later, Keaton emailed to confirm the unit hold was terminated, and the file was closed due to signature irregularities. He added, "Thank you for your prompt clarification," which was escrow speak for telling me I saved them from a mess. I filed that email in the same folder as the decree and the bank case number, because everything went in a folder now. If someone wanted to rewrite history, they could argue with timestamps. Darlene tried a new route the next morning. Because she never stopped, she just changed angles. She called my office front desk claiming I stole family money and demanded to speak to my manager. Like my workplace was another counter she could slam her hand on. My assistant flagged it and called me right away, voice tight with that polite panic people get when a personal mess hits a professional line. "Wells, your former mother-in-law is on the phone and she's making accusations," she said. And I told her, "Do not transfer anything, and document the number she called from." I didn't wait for the rumor to grow legs. I sent HR and compliance a short note that said the divorce was finalized, an in-law was attempting harassment, and no calls should be transferred without documentation. I attached the decree and the bank case number because I was done letting anyone else control the story. My manager called me a little later, and he didn't sound nosy, just concerned. "Are you okay, and do you need support from us?" he asked. "I'm handling it," I told him, because for the first time in a long time, it was true. The night before the meeting, I went back to the old place and packed the last box like I was clearing out a job site. I left my key on the counter where Tamsin couldn't miss it. Then I walked through each room and took photos of the condition, every wall and corner, because I was done trusting people to be fair when it didn't benefit them. When I got home, I set the folder with all the receipts on my kitchen table, plugged my phone in, and turned off the lamp. Next morning, I carried my folder into a small coffee shop off the frontage road, the kind where the chairs squeaked and people hid behind newspapers. I picked a back corner because nobody looked up unless someone started yelling, and I wasn't giving Tamsin a stage. I ordered black coffee, set the documents on the table, and kept my back to the wall. Tamsin came in alone, which told me she could follow at least one rule when she had to. She spotted me, smoothed her hair, and sat across from me with that careful face like she was choosing every step. She didn't smile, and she didn't order. She just stared at my folder like it was going to bite her. I didn't warm up the room with any speech. I slid 2 documents toward her and tapped the titles so she had to read them. "This one is the card spending ledger tied to your mom and Brioni," I said, keeping my voice low. "This one is the transfer list to S. Knox Studio, with the total and the dates attached." She tried to start with feelings because feelings were the last tool she had left. "Wells, this didn't have to turn into war," she said, like I was the one who lit the match. I cut her off clean. "This turned into paperwork because you kept turning everything into later." She looked down at the transfer list and said Sable was just support during a confusing time. And she never said affair, but she didn't deny the pattern either. I told her I wasn't there to punish her, because punishment was what her family expected me to threaten and then back down from. "I'm here to separate money, access, and responsibility so nobody can pretend again," I said, keeping my eyes on the paper. "Any repayment plan is about debt, not romance, and it starts with you admitting what happened." She asked, quiet, "Are you going to tell my mom?" And I answered, "Your mom already knows how to spend, and she can learn how to earn." She picked up the pen with a hand that shook just enough to show she knew this was real, and she signed both acknowledgement pages. I watched the ink settle, not like she was a villain, but like a lock finally clicking shut. Then I laid out the boundaries in plain English. No calls, email only. No surprise visits. No using third parties to pressure me. And if Darlene contacted my workplace again, I would file harassment documentation without another warning. Tamsin swallowed and said, "Can we talk someday, when all of this isn't so raw?" I said, "We are talking right now, and this is the last kind that matters." I stood up, left my coffee untouched, and walked out. I did not look back, and nobody followed me out the door. Outside, the air felt normal, and I took one full breath as I headed for my car. "Hold up, can I ask you something before you click away? If you've got hype, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people. Then please subscribe and like. It's one click and it matters. And drop a comment. When someone treats your money like theirs, do you cut them off fast or give one last chance?